Thank you for joining us today for Partners for Native Landscaping virtual program, Pollinator, Powerhouses, and Keystone Plant Species. Whether you're tuning in live or watching from our YouTube channel, it is my pleasure to introduce Vivian from the Shaw Nature Reserve. Thanks for being here with us today, Vivian.
Thank you for having me.
And I will let you go ahead and get started.
Okay, great. All right, is it pulled up? Oh, here we go. Sorry. There we go. Does everything look good?
Yes, everything looks good.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry, this is my first webinar, so bear with me here. So yeah, my name is Vivian Bouse. I work at Shaw Nature Reserve. I'm a horticulturist here. I help to co-manage the Whitmire Wildflower Garden. And so here at Shaw, we get to do a lot of plant propagation. We grow all our native plants for all our designs in our garden beds. We also teach native plant school classes to the public every month. And then we do a variety of other things around the reserve. So overall, it's a wonderful job. It's excellent to get to learn about native plants and pollinators every single day. And I'm still learning after all these years, so it's okay if you're a little bit of a newbie, that's all right, we're all learning. So today's discussion will be pollinator powerhouses and keystone plant species. And so we're going to discuss today what it means to be an ecological gardener. And we're going to talk about how to create a landscape that is not only aesthetically pleasing, but has the ability to support wildlife. With ecological gardening, we are bridging the gap between ecological restoration and horticulture. So it's kind of the middle ground between horticulture and ecological restoration. And with that, our goal is to do our part to conserve local biodiversity while creating a garden that provides beauty and interest. So our focus for today's class will be on pollinators and each species' unique resource requirements. And we're going to talk about how you can support species needs in your yard. We will gain, sorry, my notes are a little, there we go. So we will gain a better understanding of the complex interactions between wildlife and native plants in our local communities. And we'll learn what it takes to create a healthy habitat and what is the best way to use native keystone plants to maximize your success. So as ecological gardeners, our goal is to create habitat in our yards and to ideally connect our land to surrounding habitat, therefore increasing the space for wildlife to exist and flourish. So as you all know, humans have greatly decreased habitat for wildlife. We force them into fragments of habitat, like habitat islands. And so our goal with ecological gardening is to expand the space that wildlife are able to exist. So as I was saying, ecological gardening is where ecological restoration and horticulture meet. So you're bringing nature into your yard, and you're doing this by recreating local natural areas, but with intentional design and maintenance techniques to create aesthetically pleasing yards. So you're not just letting nature be wild in your yard, you are maintaining it and showing intention with different design techniques. And so whether you want to convert your entire property to native plants or just refresh non-native beds with pollinator-friendly plants, all efforts are meaningful. It is a community effort. So what constitutes a healthy ecosystem? Well, a healthy ecosystem is characterized by diversity and complexity. So high biodiversity and complex species interactions. So a complex web of interactions between organisms and their environment, food chains, the nutrient cycles, predator-prey relationships, all of that contribute to the productivity and stability of an ecosystem. And a complex and diverse ecosystem is resilient. So a high diversity of species, including both plants and animals, contribute to a more stable ecosystem. Different species can compensate for each other's changes or losses, making the system less vulnerable to disturbances, which is really important in this age with climate change and just more human disturbances to the natural ecosystems. So the foundation of good ecological design is creating a plant community that grows well together to maximize ecosystem function. And so a productive, healthy habitat means thriving symbiotic relationships. And symbiotic relationship is just where both benefit and rely on each other. So you can think of plants and pollinators. Both of them are benefiting, both of them rely on each other. So it's symbiotic relationships. And a healthy habitat also includes an abundance of plants, insects, seeds, berries, etc. Therefore, there's low competition for habitat or food. And it's also a good goal to not use pesticides in your yard to create healthy habitat, because natural predators will find their way in. Whenever you plant a diverse habitat, you bring in the predators with your with all other wildlife. And so stormwater management. So whenever you're planting densely planted native landscapes, they will help with stormwater management because their roots are so, they go so deep that they are able to help to filter out pollutants, and they also help to slow runoff. Whereas a lawn will just let runoff from the rainwater just absolutely flow and not get filtered out. Okay, so supporting insects requires an understanding of life cycle stages and species' unique resource needs. So resource needs change throughout the insect's life cycle. Many insects will overwinter in the pupa stage and then emerge as an adult. This adult doesn't go back to feeding on the leaves of a shrub like it did as a caterpillar. It now seeks out nectar plants. So if you want to support this insect, you have to consider how to provide that overwintering habitat as well as resources for the adult. So consider every stage of the life cycle for each species. So I really like to think of it in terms of creating something that is more than just a stopover garden. Rather, you're wanting to create natural communities in your yard. And so the availability of food, water, and shelter to not just provide a quick stop, but that is a suitable environment for the animal to call home and carry out its entire life cycle. So you want to do your research to get ideas on how a certain species would more likely move into your space. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And with that, you want adequate food resources for it and specific plants for its offspring. You need nesting sites. You want to consider your cleanup and maintenance techniques. And then also, the more options for each resource, so the more options you have for habitat, food, shelter, all of that, the more likely you are to support lots of different insects and their unique needs. And having a diverse range of insects will bring in a diverse range of other wildlife. So insects make the world go round. The productivity and health of an ecosystem relies heavily on its insect diversity and abundance. So every organism in an ecosystem plays an important role in the complex food web. However, insects and plants are crucially important as they provide such a critical and large portion of the biomass and productivity, the food and habitat, to support all other organisms. And when we're discussing building a healthy ecosystem in our yards, we can focus efforts on supporting a high diversity of insects, including bees, butterflies, ants, beetles, etc. All right, so if you're not familiar with Doug Tallamy, I highly recommend checking out his work. He has some great books. Actually, that is when I first got into native plants, I read one of his books, and I will say that was almost life-changing. So I highly recommend you check him out. He does a lot of research, and one of his research studies is on chickadees. So he was wanting to find out how many caterpillars it takes to raise a brood of birds. And so he observed a nest of chickadees. And when he was doing this research, he basically just observed a nest, and he observed from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And he saw that both parents took turns feeding them, and they would return with food for their fledglings every 3 minutes. And he found that that's a total of 350 to 570 caterpillars every single day, depending on how many chicks they have, which to me seems like a lot of caterpillars. It adds up to 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of chickadees, which is absolutely crazy. They are very small birds, so I can't imagine how many caterpillars it takes to raise woodpeckers or some other large bird. And so these birds are needing that food source to raise their young. So 96% of our bird species in the US, which is 215 bird species in the eastern US, depend on insects as food for their young. Caterpillars supported by native plants are a particularly important source for the baby birds. So the question is, how can we support insects? If we want to bring songbirds into our yard, everyone loves songbirds. Not so many people think of insects, but however, it is important for us to support their food source, which is the insects. So wildlife can be classified as specialists or generalists. Generalists are what it sounds. They're not picky about food or habitat selection, and they can often be spotted on non-native plants. Specialists, on the other hand, rely on specific genre or species of plant for food and habitat to raise their young. And the plants that they rely on are called their host plants. And you may be familiar with monarchs and their host plant being milkweed. And so monarchs rely on a specific genus of plants, which is just the milkweed genus, which includes a lot of different species. But then there are a lot of insects that are even more limited, and they rely, their host plants are very specific species of plants. A good example being pipevine swallowtails. They rely on the pipevine. Dutchman's pipevine is a single species. And this cute little chubby caterpillar is on a pawpaw tree. That is a swallowtail caterpillar.
Hey, Vivian,
Yeah.
this is Cole over at the St. Louis County Library. Your presentation is cut off a little bit at the bottom, I think because you're presenting not in full screen mode.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Is it possible for you to switch over to that?
Oh, did that work?
No, I still see
Oh.
like the top of your Google Chrome. When you go to share, let's see. It might be if you go down to like the bottom left-hand corner of your slides, is there like an options there where you could go to full screen mode?
Shoot. No. Let me see. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I switched. I had it to where it wasn't my full screen, but I just switched it. And so if that do it, I'm not sure.
Do you have an option to, hold on, I'm gonna stop the share for just a minute and then maybe we can fix it from the beginning. So let's,
okay.
And we're gonna,
well, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, this is my first webinar, so I'll blame it on that.
okay, so let's try again. If you go to the share and then you'll probably want to go to presentation.
Yeah.
And I typically do, okay. And then if you make that full screen, are you on a Mac?
Yes.
Okay, that makes a difference then. So when you go to share, I think you're actually going to want to share the application window instead of the screen. That way it can pick up the whole PowerPoint. So let's try that one more time. Okay, try one more time to share from the beginning and then pick the application window instead of the screen.
Okay.
Okay, it's still doing that. That's really strange. When you go to present up in the top right, is that going to fix it? Okay, that looks better. I think I can see all of it now.
Let me, oh, of course I exited out of it. Shoot.
Sorry, everybody at home. Thank you for being patient with us. Okay, so when you go over to present up in the top right corner, a little bit further to the right there, you should be able, if you click that, whenever it finishes loading. And then use presenter view. There we go. And hopefully once it loads. No, that wasn't it either. Because now we have all this.
Okay.
There should be an option down in the bottom left. Is one of those the right option there?
One of these?
Yeah, is one of those like a full screen? No.
I could maybe. No. I don't know.
Can you go back to your PowerPoint? I'm sorry. To the left, the tab up at the top, where you have your PowerPoint. Yeah, if you go there. Oh, okay, there. That looks like I can see the full screen now.
Okay, the only issue is I can't see my notes.
Oh, you can see your notes. Oh.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Why don't you go ahead and present however you can see your notes, and it was only cut off a little bit at the bottom, so I hope that isn't too much information that we'll be missing. And I guess just moving forward, just keep in mind that people might not be able to see that last line of text.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm
sorry everybody, and sorry to stop you in your presentation too.
No, that's okay. That's all right. Thank you for letting me know.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so let me find where we were. Shoot. Gonna be a little slow. All right, I think we were at this. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you all for your patience. We'll get right back into it. So yeah, so 90% of the plant-eating insects can only eat a few plant lineages. So these are the plants that they co-evolved with and have specialized on. And up to 60% of our native bees are pollen specialists, so they only eat pollen from specific plants. Here in Missouri, there are 225 species that are oligolectic, kind of a hard word, which is about 50% of our native bees. And that word, oligolectic, if I'm saying it correctly, that is used in pollination ecology to reference bees that specialize in collecting pollen from a limited number of closely related plant species or genre. So it's similar to the butterflies and moths that have a host plant. Bees also will specialize on specific plants. So Missouri native pollinators. So there are about 450 native bee species in Missouri, 200 butterfly species. And then it was kind of hard. I was researching moths and I could not find a definite answer to how many moth species are in Missouri, but I found anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000, which was very surprising to me. And then also along with those species, There are wasps, beetles, flies, ants, and hummingbirds that contribute to pollination. But today we're just going to focus on butterflies, moths, and bees. Okay, so one example of specialization is the spring beauty miner bee. So you may be familiar with spring beauty. It is blooming right now and it's gorgeous. A lot of times you'll see this, just an absolute mat of it covering a lawn. And so that's kind of why I like it. It is very common in people's lawns and it's really easy to encourage it to spread in your lawn. And all insects love it, but there are specialists on it, just like this cute little bee. And I mentioned earlier the pipevine. Pipevine swallowtail is it specializes on this plant. And so the larvae feed only on pipevine. The adults use nectar-producing plants as hosts, such as phlox and ironweed. And so basically the pipevine swallowtail will spend the winter as a pupa, but in warmer climates, pupation only lasts a few weeks. And so sorry, let me catch where I'm at here. So I really like this plant because we have one in the garden and it's gorgeous. And in the summer, it's covered in these caterpillars and it's really neat to see. And you'll see these beautiful blue butterflies flitting around. And then I like to include this, let me get this right here. So I like to include this because it kind of puts into perspective whenever you're doing garden cleanup, you have to be careful because you wouldn't really notice this hanging onto a branch, but this is what they overwinter as. Yeah, and then this is the neat little flower of it, pipevine swallowtail, or pipevine. Okay, so I just wanted to throw this in here as well. Along with that spring beauty, violets. Violets are native and they are also commonly found in lawns. And they're actually the host plant for 14 species of greater fritillaries and 16 lesser fritillaries. These butterflies will only lay their eggs where there are violets for their larvae to feed on. And the other thing, I won't go too much on my soapbox about thistles and thistle longhorn bees, but thistles are a plant that is considered extremely weedy. There is a non-native species that is very invasive, musk thistle. And so it's pretty common for people to think you should just, or for people to recommend that you should just spray all thistle. But there is this adorable little bee that is a specialist on it. And then also I came to love thistle because I was doing some pollinator surveys, and whenever it was in bloom, late summer, early fall, it was always covered in pollinators. There'd be like 3 on one flower, and then there'd be other ones like lining up. So it is a great species. And I just like to spread awareness about things like that, because if we just get rid of all thistle, then we'll get rid of the thistle longhorn bee. And so it makes sense that endangered species are often specialists. And so you should plant with endangered species and specialists in mind. By selecting plants that support specialists, you're also supporting a variety of generalists. And so you should research your local insect species when you're selecting plants. And this is a regal fritillary, and they dwell primarily in grasslands with native violets, which is their primary food source. This species is very sensitive to, its habit, the quality of its habitat. And so across its range, this species prevalence has declined as much as 99.9%, which is a very common theme among insects. So keystone plants. The insect specialists we just discussed rely on keystone plant species. Native plants of all varieties play a vitally important role in our ecosystems. Some native plants, though, go above and beyond by supporting more than their fair share of wildlife, earning them the title of keystone species. So the loss of a keystone in an ecosystem causes devastation and abundance of many, causes devastation as the diversity and abundance of many essential insect species, the primary food source for many wildlife, will be diminished. The ecosystem collapses, similar in a way that the removal of the keystone in ancient Roman arch will trigger its demise. So that's why it has that name, Keystone. because you remove that one stone, the entire system will totally just be devastated. So there are two types of keystone plants. There are the host plants that feed the young caterpillars of approximately 90% of butterflies and moths. And then there are the pollen host plants. They support the specialist bees. So keystone plants for specialists feed both specialist and generalist insects. So it's better to research what specialists are in your ecoregion and plant the most widely utilized host plants, or you can focus on planting the host plants for endangered insects. All right, so 14% of native plants, the keystone, support 90% of butterfly and moth species. And then 15 to 60% of native bee species are pollen specialists who only eat pollen from 40% of native plants. And these numbers were from research studies by Doug Tallamy, as I mentioned earlier, as well as Jared Fowler, who has a very excellent website on bee specialists. It goes very into depth on his studies on specialization by bees. Very interesting. So the significance of keystone species, they have what is called low functional redundancy, which is if the species were to disappear from the ecosystem, no other species would be able to fill its role. The ecosystem would be forced to radically change, which would allow new and possibly invasive species to populate the habitat. So if you remove keystone species, the diversity and abundance of many essential insect species, which 96% of terrestrial birds rely on for food sources, will be diminished. So basically, the removal of keystone species will trigger catastrophic ecological impacts, and it sends the habitat out of balance. Keystone species are defined by ecoregion, so it's not just across the board everywhere that they're the same. And you can even take it a step further for us and look at the Ozark Highlands, kind of divide the state up. Boop, 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 boop. So the main contributors are trees and shrubs, but wildflowers do play a role with their sheer size and variety. And I included this in here. So on Grow Native's website, they have this host with the most rat card, which is very helpful. And on it, it has a list of the woody and perennial plants, and then the number of species of butterfly and moth caterpillars that they support. And we'll get a little bit more into depth here. So the top keystone species are oak trees. So if you can plant anything, plant an oak. So oak trees support 557 species of butterflies and moths, as well as provide many critical resources to all other wildlife, food, cover, and places to raise young. And not only do they provide the food to caterpillars, they also provide acorns, which are a key winter food source for dozens of mammal and bird species. And then in the winter, their fallen leaves will provide habitat for numerous insects, amphibians, and microorganisms. Another keystone powerhouse are the willows. So there's 10 to 20 plus species of specialist bees rely on willows for pollen. Oh. And then, sorry, I didn't have my other number on there. Let me look at it. So if we go on here and we're looking at willows, 455 species of butterflies and moth caterpillars are supported by willows. And so in Missouri, we have a few species of willows. And when you think of willows, you might think of the weeping willow, but Missouri has mostly all the species are water-loving species, but we have this prairie willow, which can tolerate dry and sunny conditions. And it's actually really great for formal landscapes and it does make great privacy hedges and works well in naturalized open woodlands. But yeah, we have it here at Shaw, just up against a fence row in a mass planting, and it looks really great as a hedge. All right, and then so moving on from the trees, we'll talk about perennials. So goldenrods. Goldenrods get a lot of hate, and they deserve a lot more love and they deserve a place in every yard. So they are a pollinator favorite. You can see this by 115 species of butterflies and moths. They are the top perennial to provide for insects. And it's a common misconception that they cause allergies. That is incorrect. You can blame ragweed that blooms at the same time as it. Ragweed is pollinated by the wind. whereas goldenrods are pollinated by insects. And so the pollen is too heavy for the wind to carry it and for it to reach our noses. So yeah, it's actually ragweed's fault. Tell your friends. And there are weedy native goldenrods, such as Canada goldenrod and tall goldenrod, and they are not recommended to be in a home landscape, but they do still have ecological value. There are, however, lots of great species of goldenrods. For example, this one right here, this is the blue stem goldenrod. I really like this one. It has very nice dark glossy leaves, and it has like a nice little mini shrub shape to it. And just a few other species of goldenrods that I would recommend for a landscape. You have the showy goldenrod, which is a sun-loving prairie species. And it's just really cute, and it's cute whenever you plant it in a mass, especially with something like blazing star in the back. Another species is stiff-leaved goldenrod. I like this one, especially for winter interest in your garden, because it maintains that upright shape to it all winter. And then it also just has really beautiful green leaves. They're just a certain shade of green that are really beautiful. And then for your woodland, there is zigzag goldenrod, which is a short species, and it's pretty cute. It looks really cute when you plant it in mass. But yeah, it does well in dry, shady woodlands. All right, and then asters. So asters are very important as well. They support 112 species of butterflies and moths and about 60 species of pollen specialist bees. And so with asters, I think a lot of us fear that they look weedy. It's kind of the same with goldenrods. There are weedier species out there, but some of the species that I really like for a landscape are aromatic aster. It's a glade species, but it does well in dry garden settings, and it stays short and compact, and it can be used in formal settings or naturalized settings. This is actually one that I grew from seed, and it's basically, it just looks like a small shrub, and I put it right up front by my porch, and that is my dog for reference. Blue wood aster, that does well in dry to average woodland settings, and it can handle some shade and some sun. Prairie aster is actually one I overlooked before, but then I noticed in the garden this past fall, and it quickly became one of my favorite asters. It just has very big, vibrant flowers and attractive stems, and it does well in sun and part shade. And then this little cutie pie is stiff-leaved aster, which I don't really like to have favorites, but this is definitely one of my favorites. It is very cute. It grows in acidic, rocky, open woodlands, and it's just small and delicate and looks great scattered around a woodland garden. And the last Keystone powerhouse that we would talk about are the sunflowers. So these support 73 species of butterflies and moths. We have an annual sunflower that's here in the middle, which you can sometimes see along the side highways. And it's very cute. It does get tall. The willow leaf sunflower, this one is really unique because it has that willow-like leaf texture to it. And so it looks really good in a naturalized setting. It does get tall, so you kind of have to have it in the middle or back of a bed, but it looks really great. Just the texture of it there. And then we have a woodland sunflower that I recommend. This one is I like it for naturalized plantings and planted in mass like it is like here. But we do have specialist insects for it. So this is a bee that is a specialist on it. And so yeah, so you plant the sunflowers and you get the specialist sunflower bees. And so that was just a few of the host plants. If you look back at that host plant rack card, that has all of them listed on there. And so now we'll discuss how to use Keystone plants in your yard and the ecological considerations for plant selection, design choices, maintaining your yard, and continuous learning and evolving with your landscape and community. So you don't have to read all of this, but this is just an example of how you get your habitat to be certified. So this is a very extensive list of things to consider including in your yard. Here's just a shortened version of that. So what you really want to focus on is having a high diversity of resources available. So that includes habitat, food, water. You want to look at your soil health, your water usage, and Other things to consider are design choices and your plant selection. And then also maintenance techniques. So with habitat, you have every insect has specific needs. Every insect has different requirements. Some bees are ground nesting, and they require bare soil, sandy areas. And so if you have mulch in your yard, if you only use mulch on all your beds, that will prevent nesting sites. It won't allow the bees to nest there, which a lot of times you'll see like bare, kind of sparse grass, and they will choose to nest there. And you see these little holes. It's a good sign that the bees are there. So your overall goal is a diversity of habitat resources to accommodate as many species as you can. So along with the ground nesting bees, we have stem nesting insects. And with this, you want to try to include hollow or pithy stems for bees and insects. Most of them require hollow stems, but honestly, it's just best to include a variety of sizes and stems and diverse levels of thickness. Just a quick little list. There's species with hollow stems, like Joe Pyeweed is one of my favorites, as well as rattlesnake master and baptisias. Those are really great. Oop. And then pithy stems, coneflowers, goldenrods, asters, and blazing stars. So these will stand up throughout winter, and they just provide that overwintering habitat for the insects. And this chart is very helpful just to get kind of an idea of how you're supposed to cut back your stems in order to provide that nesting habitat. With this, you want to consider cutting your stems between 12 and 18 inches, and they provide nesting sites for other wild bees in spring and summer. I'll go a little more in depth on cutbacks. So the best time to cut down stems, I know traditional gardening is as soon as it starts to get cold, people will just go out and totally clear their garden beds. But whenever you're gardening for wildlife, you want to consider how you can leave stems to provide that habitat. So late winter, early spring, kind of around February, March, you want to cut the stems back to between 8 to 24 inches tall. Aim to have at least some stems cut back by early March, when our earliest emerging stem nesting bees will start looking for nesting sites. So by leaving plants intact through winter, you'll have not only a beautiful landscape, but you'll also have food and shelter for pollinators and other wildlife. So I included this in here. You can see, so this tick seed, this Coreopsis, was cut, and the stems will still, so you leave the stems standing, and then you let the new vegetation grow around it. And those stems could potentially have nesting bees inside them that have not yet emerged. So you want to make sure that you leave them standing as much as possible. So another thing with habitat is structural layers. So that is the canopy, understory, shrub, grasses, perennials, and ground covers. So with this, you want to build your habitat by strategically choosing species from each of those categories. And you want to plant keystone layers. So an example of this is to plant shade-tolerant, smaller understory trees, shrubs, and other native woodland plants under large canopy keystone trees to create additional layers of habitat. These are just some examples of that in a more formal setting. So you don't have to have a huge naturalized woodland in your yard in order to follow these concepts. So yeah, so you just want to have different layers, your shrub layers, and then your middle ground layers, and then your ground cover layers. And like this is a river birch with different, so you still have these ground covers with your keystone species. All right, so another concept is green mulch, which is plants acting as mulch. You want to include a matrix of species intermingled beneath taller layers to replace annual wood mulch applications while fighting weeds, conserving soil moisture, and providing habitat and protection for wildlife. So the ground covers do the work in preventing weeds from taking hold, so there's less maintenance. The ground layer intermingles through other plant layers to create a constant corridor, allowing much more movement throughout your yard. and so it acts as a shelter for wildlife to travel freely. Over time, it is best to use shorter native plants as green mulch. To do this, you just want to keep adding more ground covers and planting densely in your gardens. And then also, wherever possible, if you can leave wild areas. So leaving downed logs, leaving leaf litter, that will all provide habitat. This is just an example of having more of a wild setting in your yard. And ground covers such as sedges, wild ginger, ferns, columbine, Solomon seal, and Solomon's plume, Jacob's ladder, celandine. All of those act really great around the base of trees just to create that habitat for insects. And then another thing you can include in your landscape are habitat piles. These are excellent for all sorts of wildlife. I know that bumblebees will actually nest in log piles and rock piles, and a variety of other insects will also utilize them. So they're constructed piles of logs, branches, and other materials, and they mimic natural features in forests and can be created in our yards. These piles offer refuge from predators, protection from harsh weather, and a variety of spaces for different species. So we've all heard the phrase, leave the leaves. This is a very important concept in ecological gardening because a lot of pollinators and other invertebrates will spend the winter very near their summer foraging sites in the landscape, and they spend the winter hidden amongst the fallen leaves. And we'll go a little more in depth on that. So fallen leaves provide vital ecosystem services. They provide that shelter. They provide a food source for birds and other wildlife because there's the insects that are in the leaves, and then also any berries and nuts that are found in the leaf layer. The leaves will decompose and increase organic matter, which improves your soil health. And then they also help to reduce soil erosion and suppress weeds and improve moisture retention. So this is just a little example. This lady beetle, they are beneficial predators, and they overwinter in different stages. They will overwinter so some species will overwinter as adults and some overwinter as larvae, but they overwinter in the leaves. And yeah, so they are a beneficial predator. They are really great to attract in your garden so that you don't really need to use pesticides. So bumblebee queens will hibernate under thick piles of leaves and just below the soil surface. I have accidentally uncovered queen bees before when I was planting in the fall, and they really are just right below the layer of leaves and soil. So it's that's a good thing to keep in mind. You want to be careful when you're walking through your garden beds when you're trying to do cleanup in the fall and winter, because these queen bees don't burrow very deep. So also, except for the migratory butterflies, which is like the monarch butterfly, our butterflies overwinter in the leaf litter, and they rely on it for protection throughout the winter. So whenever people are completely cleaning out their yards of all leaves, we're also removing fireflies, butterflies, moths, bees, etc. Okay, so this concept is by Heather Holm. She is a insect expert, essentially. So I highly recommend checking out her work. So she came up with the term soft landing, which is a diverse native planting under native trees that provide critical shelter and habitat for one or more life cycle stages of moths, butterflies, and other beneficial insects. Over 90% of caterpillars that develop on trees drop to the ground and pupate within the organic matter on the ground. So basically, a lot of insect species will wrap themselves up in leaves, and then when the leaf falls to the ground, that is where they will spend the winter. So what you're wanting to do is create caterpillar pupation sites, which is you want to create diverse native plantings under native trees. Luna moths are a good example of this. So they will form cocoons that are wrapped in dead leaves, and then the cocoons fall into the leaf litter. 94% of moths drop off the tree when they develop as larvae, where they land among leaves, soil, and bark to pupate in cocoons. So yeah, so planting intentional soft landings under keystone trees will build, it has a lot of benefits. It will build healthy soil, provide food for songbirds and pollinators, sequester more carbon than turf grass, and it reduces time spent mowing. So yeah, with soft landings, I just like to think of it as typically you'll see just a plain mulch bed under a tree. And if the insect were to just fall on that bare mulch, it would not have a lot of protection throughout the winter. So it's much better to plant diverse native plantings under the tree that will provide that critical habitat. And this is just a chart about soft landings from Heather Holmes' website. And so yeah, with that, just including in there that when you have these, so say you have your front yard and it's a little shady, and underneath the tree, if you have a tree in your yard, the grass will not grow very well. It can be pretty sparse. So that is a good spot to plant a soft landing. And then you won't have to mow, so a lot less maintenance, and you'll be providing for insects. All right, so food resources. So you want to incorporate keystone plants. You want to support those insects that rely on host plants. And then you're supporting a whole array of generalist species as well. You want to include shrubs and trees that produce berries, nuts, and acorns. You want to leave seed heads for birds. Birds absolutely love coneflowers. They are just all over them. So those are a great thing, a great species to leave standing. And then also you want to think of your early and late season blooming species for emerging bumblebees in the spring, and then also for the last grab of nutrition before winter or migration. And you want to try to include winter food sources. So these would be like trees and shrubs that produce berries, nuts, and acorns. These are just some examples. Possum haw looks so great in a garden setting. I highly recommend that. And then we have things like shagbark hickory that produce hickory nuts, and then viburnums. They're just all around great small trees for the landscape. Another small tree that I recommend for landscape is spicebush. So spicebush swallowtail is a specialist of spicebush. And it has a great fall color to it, and it produces these beautiful red berries. So it has year-round interest for humans. And then, yeah, it supports these spicebush swallowtail caterpillars. So just some tips on designing a garden with keystones. You want to make sure that you are including at least one species blooming every season. The more species, the better. You want to plant in masses to attract pollinators for easier foraging. And you want to combine different season blooms next to each other. So when you have a planting, it's a good idea to include something that blooms in the spring next to something that blooms in the summer, or something in the fall, something in the spring. Just combine those, and then you'll have year-round blooms next to each other. And then also you'll have some visual interests like this aromatic aster and these mountain mint seed heads. The mountain mint bloomed in the summer, and so now the aromatic aster is blooming in the fall, and it looks great together. So for year-round interest, just things to consider if you're wanting to leave your garden standing for the wildlife, you want to consider your choosing species that have structural interests, and you want to choose species with fall and winter foliage that maintains visual interest. So with this, the shape of plants, their foliage and leaf shape, that is more important than the flowers that come and go. Grasses maintain great shape, texture, and color through winter, and they also provide overwintering habitat. And some species that I recommend that hold their shape and provide color with seed heads, the wild indigos, those are great. They have like a nice mounding shape to them, look like small shrubs. And mountain mints, as we saw earlier, coneflowers are great, asters, stiff goldenrod, and then some grasses, little blue stem, river oats, and prairie dropseed. So these are just all great species to consider for fall and winter interest. And we'll touch really quickly on one design style, matrix design style. So this is using structural layers as a guideline, essentially. So you want to think about structural layers in your garden. One of the simplest choices you can make to increase habitat in your garden design is to include plants of a variety of heights, shapes, and bloom seasons. So the logical next step is to decide where your taller plants, including trees or shrubs, are placed. And then, so just think of each layer. So you want to look at your trees and shrubs, your smaller kind of middle-sized perennials, and then down to your ground covers. And so matrix planting is forming a matrix where plants are kind of interwoven. And it's not just having just a mess of plants in a setting. It is having mass plantings or mass species that will just kind of flow throughout each other. And so it still maintains an intentional design, but it's very naturalistic looking, and it provides great resources for wildlife. All right, so with matrix planting, you can plant soft landings under keystone trees. So as I was saying earlier, if you have a tree in your yard, it would be great to just replace all the lawn around it with native plantings. That way you don't have to worry about it kind of looking sparse and not great. And then also just providing habitat. So you want to start by creating a rough layout, mapping the placements and overlapping layers in your newly designed space. So incorporating plants according to their mature sizes and aesthetic contributions ensures that the garden will remain balanced and beautiful throughout the year. With matrix planting, you don't have to have exact numbers for each species. It's more of a naturalized look. And you want to think about the ecological principle of sociability, which is just basically thinking about how plants grow in their native environments. So in a healthy woodland, you would see the entire ground layer is covered by plants. And so you can consider recreating that in your yard. And a lot of people don't really like to include grasses because they fear that they can kind of take over. But many native grasses serve as the larval host plants for a diversity of butterflies. They also provide food and critical winter shelter. And I like to think of it as there's a fine line between planting a collection of native plants and creating a plant community. And so you have to consider how the plants work together and what they naturally, the species that they naturally would grow with in order to really create a healthy and thriving habitat. And just a quick little list of some native grasses that I recommend for a home garden. In green, those are more of a woodland species, but they can also tolerate some sun. Some of my favorites on here are prairie dropseed that has a nice formal look to it, and it can be really great to use it as a border of your plantings to maintain more of an intentional look to it. Okay. So if you have a small space, which a lot of us do, and a lot of us think, well, we can't really do much with our yard because we don't have very much space. But you can still apply all the same ecological gardening techniques as you would in any size landscape, like structural layers, thinking about including plants that are of all season, choosing plants for all season blooms, designing with matrix plantings, and then repeated and mass planting. So all those are ecological gardening techniques that you can kind of do on a smaller scale. You definitely want to try to incorporate keystone species as much as possible. And then also, if you're in a small space, you can still provide for wildlife while keeping in mind your neighbors and doing cleanup techniques that will still create habitat and still provide overwintering and shelter for insects, but will still maintain more of a tidy look, a more formal look to it. So some ideas is cutting your front borders and mulching to show intention, but leave standing masses of vegetation such as asters, coneflowers, and grasses. So this will provide winter interest as well. And then with leaving the leaves, you can still do that in a more formal setting. Here in the garden, we like to kind of rake them into the back of the bed or underneath shrubs. So you still are leaving that vital vital habitat for overwintering insects, but it is more of a tidy look to it. So it shows that you are maintaining your landscape. And these are just some examples of small spaces having diverse plantings. This right here is prairie dropseed, as I was talking about. So it has just a very nice look to it, and it looks really great when it's planted in mass. I really enjoy this because this is still maintaining a tidy look to it, and they still have a lot of lawn if they want that. And so I just like how they have the repeating colors of the butterfly weed here, the orange. And then, it just looks great. And so they have these little native plantings, but they keep it in such a tidy way that it just looks like traditional gardening. Okay, so this is a bed here at the Whitmire that I planted last year. And I just want to show how when you have a small space, you can still have a diverse planting and you can still incorporate all your structural layers. So I'm gonna run through all the species that I planted in here. These are the scientific names of them. So in this bed, when I was thinking of an entrance bed that I wanted to keep tidy and very clean looking, I wanted to include a variety of all my favorite plants. And so with this, we have this right here is the maidenhair bush, which is really great. It's a nice tidy shrub. It really keeps a nice shape to it. And then I included a grass. I included a little blue stem, which adds some nice structural interest throughout the winter. Another favorite of mine is feathery blue star, Amsonia ciliata. That is, it has these very nice, delicate, fringy looking leaves to it, and then a very beautiful blue flower in the spring. I also included prairie dock, which is these large leaves here. It adds another textural interest along. So whenever you combine something like a large leaf like this with this nice delicate texture, they really complement one another. And then I included this Baptisia australis, which is blue wild indigo. This gets a nice mounding shape to it, so it looks like a small shrub, and it just maintains a very nice look to it all throughout winter. It holds its shape. I included an aster. This is smooth aster, Symphyotrichum leve. And then some ground covers, you can kind of see. Rose verbena, that is excellent. It started blooming about a month ago, and actually last year it bloomed until November. And the butterflies love it. It's a great one. I highly recommend it. This is pussy toes. It gets a flower that actually looks like a little paw, a little cat paw. So that's why it has that name. And it makes a really great ground cover in dry, sunny areas. Another one is Enothera macrocarpa. So this is a Missouri evening primrose. Really large, beautiful yellow leaves, and it makes a great ground cover as well. Another species I'm trying out this year is Scutellaria parvula, which is small skullcap. It makes a great, right now it looks like it's such a cute little ground cover. I love it. And then it gets these little purple flowers on it. And then Blophelia ciliata is another favorite of mine. It makes a great ground cover. Cone flowers. I included both glade cone flowers and purple cone flowers. They bloom at different times. And cone flowers just add a nice little pop of structure to your planting. And then goldenrods, I added showy goldenrod. Oh, so the showy goldenrod will bloom at the same time as the aster. So that was my goal, was to have something blooming all throughout the year. And so I was able to accomplish that. And I have about 2 to 3 species blooming every season. That's just a little example of some of the plantings that we do here in the Whitmire. So we want to keep more of a formal look, but then also having diverse plantings and having the entire ground be covered in plants. So we try not to use too much mulch and just create that living green mulch. Just a little note on sourcing your plants and seeds. You want to make sure that you are buying from local nurseries. And here's just a list of some nurseries that I recommend. And so you want to also, if you're using seed mixtures, you want to be very picky and not buy the store. At like big box stores, they often sell those wildflower mixes that sometimes include invasive species, and they usually always include non-native species. So just be careful about what seed mixtures you are buying, and try to purchase from a local nursery. And local ecotypes. So it's very important to only purchase plants that are local to your area for genetic diversity. And then also you can propagate your own plants, which is something I really enjoy doing. So you can winter sow native plants using milk jugs. And it's just a very simple concept of creating like a mini greenhouse to grow plants outside. Very hands off. And yeah. So you can gauge your success basically by observing and identifying the insects in your yard. So if you want to see how well you are supporting insects, you can go out and just identify what insects are out in your yard. And if you see a lot of generalist insects, that might be a sign that maybe you need to incorporate a different variety of native plants. Maybe you need to do more research on specialist insects and include more host plants. All right. Oh, my goodness. All right, so that is all I have. So there's my email if anyone needs to reach out to me. I also have some helpful internet resources. Yeah.